Welcome to Founding Chronicles, where we uncover the hidden stories of America's past. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And hit the bell icon so you never miss a tale from History.Today. We explore a haunting story from early America, a tale of ambition, secrecy, and tragedy. It is the story of siblings who married for power but whose twin children were born deformed, forever altering their lives and leaving a legacy of sorrow and resilience. Let's journey back in time and uncover the full story. In the quiet, rolling hills of early 19th century America, power and lineage often mattered more than love, more than morality. In a small, secluded town nestled between forests and rivers, the lives of one family would soon become the whispered tragedy of generations. At the heart of this tale were two siblings, a brother and a sister, bound not only by blood, but by ambition, desire, and a chilling determination to consolidate their family's wealth and influence. Their union was arranged in secrecy, whispered about behind heavy curtains and shuttered windows. For even in an era when many things were hidden, such a bond was considered unnatural, almost unthinkable. Yet to them, it was the only path to power. The brother Jonathan was a man of striking presence, tall, with a commanding gaze that unsettled even those who knew him well. He had inherited a modest fortune from his father, but his hunger for influence and control drove him further than most men dared to go. His sister, Elizabeth, shared his ambition. She was clever, composed, and unnervingly calm, with a sharp mind that saw advantage in every shadow, every smile, every whispered promise. To outsiders, they appeared as a perfectly ordinary brother and sister, attending church services, helping the poor, and maintaining the facade of a pious, respectable family. But beneath that veneer was a calculated partnership, a plan that would soon tip the balance of nature and morality. In the months leading up to their secret union, the town gossiped about other families, other marriages, unaware of the storm brewing in the quiet house at the edge of the village. Jonathan and Elizabeth took care to disguise their meetings, walking together in the woods under the cover of fog, exchanging letters written in code, plotting not just their marriage but the consolidation of lands and assets that would place them among the wealthiest and most powerful families in the region. The secrecy added a sense of danger, of forbidden excitement, and it fanned the fire of their resolve. Every look, every touch, every shared smile was an act of rebellion against a society that could never understand the lengths they were willing to go. When the marriage finally occurred, it was in the dead of winter, in a small, dimly lit chapel, far from the town, officiated by a minister who was paid handsomely to ignore the implications of the union. They exchanged vows that were as much a pact of power as they were a promise of loyalty to one another. Their eyes gleamed with the certainty that they were untouchable, that no scandal, no rumor could shake the careful fortress they had built around themselves. And yet, even in that moment of triumph, there was an unspoken tension, a quiet fear in Elizabeth's heart, a whisper of doubt that perhaps the consequences of defying nature could be cruel and unrelenting. Months passed, and Elizabeth's body became a vessel of both hope and dread. When the news of her pregnancy spread carefully, through trusted servants who were sworn to secrecy, the household was filled with a mixture of pride and anxiety. The prospect of children born from this union was at once a triumph of their design and a potential nightmare. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, and warnings about inbreeding were whispered among the learned few, often ignored by those who believed themselves above nature's limits. Jonathan remained confident, believing that love, willpower, and careful planning could overcome the risks that nature might impose. Elizabeth, however, felt the subtle tremors of unease. Every ache, every unusual symptom, every restless night filled her with questions she dared not voice aloud. Were they tampering with forces beyond their understanding? Were the children they longed for destined to be as unnatural as the union that had created them? When the day finally arrived, the house was shrouded in a tense, expectant silence. Midwives, women of experience, hardened by years of birth and death, prepared for the delivery. Elizabeth labored through hours of pain, sweat dampening her brow, her hands clutching the bedsheets as if the walls themselves could bear witness to the gravity of what was unfolding. And then, finally, the twins were born. At first, there was the brief, fleeting joy that comes with the arrival of life, the cry of the first child, the weight of a tiny body placed in a mother's arms. But that joy was short-lived. The midwives' faces grew pale, their whispers sharp with fear and confusion. The twins were not as they should have been. Limbs were twisted, faces malformed, and cries carried a strange, unsettling quality. The room, moments ago filled with hope, now held a heavy, suffocating air of dread. Jonathan, standing by the doorway, felt a cold stab of disbelief. Elizabeth's eyes, wide with shock and sorrow, locked onto his. In that silent moment, both understood the magnitude of the tragedy that had just begun. The news, once it inevitably seeped beyond the walls of the household, sent ripples through the small town. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to accusations. As neighbors speculated about the unnatural marriage and the children who had suffered for it, the family's carefully constructed image of power and respectability began to crack, revealing the dark undercurrent of ambition and secrecy that had driven them to this point. Jonathan and Elizabeth, once united in purpose, now faced a choice: hide the truth, bury it beneath layers of wealth and influence, or confront a reality that was far more terrifying than any scandal. Their children, innocent yet irrevocably marked, became symbols of a hubris that dared to challenge the natural order, a tragic testament to ambition, secrecy, and the devastating consequences of bending morality to one's will. Even as the twins struggled to survive, the house that had once echoed with laughter and the plotting whispers of ambition grew quiet. Elizabeth, torn between love and despair, spent long nights cradling her children, whispering promises she feared she could never keep. Jonathan, once proud and unyielding, now wrestled with guilt and helplessness, confronted by the stark reminder that power could not undo the immutable laws of life. In the shadows of that small home, the family story became a quiet, private horror, a narrative of longing, failure, and the price paid when ambition collides with nature itself. And though the town would continue its life, its gossip, and its routines, the house at the edge of the village would forever carry the weight of a tragedy that no amount of wealth, secrecy, or determination could erase. The birth of the twins cast a long shadow over the family, one that stretched across the walls of their home and into every corner of the town. Life, once orderly and predictable, became a relentless struggle. The children, fragile and deformed, demanded constant care. Their cries, sharp and piercing, echoed through the halls day and night, a constant reminder of the consequences of the choices their parents had made. Elizabeth spent hours holding them close, murmuring words of comfort that barely touched the fear gnawing at her heart. Each small movement, each labored breath, was a reminder that life itself could be both a blessing and a punishment. Jonathan, for all his pride and ambition, found himself paralyzed by helplessness. He had sought power, wealth, and influence, believing that human will could overcome any obstacle, even nature itself. Yet here, in the dimly lit nursery, he was confronted by a truth he could not bend. Life was fragile, and even the strongest resolve could not guarantee happiness. The house, once filled with the laughter of whispered plans and secret meetings, now rang with sorrow. Servants moved quietly, avoiding the children's cries, unsure of how to offer help without offending their employers. Even the midwives, once confident and assured, treated the twins with a mixture of fear and awe. whispering to one another about deformities and the unnatural circumstances of their birth. Outside the house, the town's curiosity and suspicion grew. Small towns in America were communities built on observation and gossip. People noticed when the family's shutters remained closed for weeks, when visitors were rare, and when the children never appeared in public. Rumors began to swirl. Some whispered that the siblings' marriage had defied God's will, that the children's deformities were punishment for a sin too grave to name aloud. Others suggested darker possibilities, stories fueled by fear and imagination rather than fact. The family's name, once spoken with respect, began to carry a weight of whispered shame. Friends and acquaintances offered condolences or excuses for absence, but the subtle tension in every interaction made clear that suspicion lingered. Never far from the surface, within the house, tension grew between Jonathan and Elizabeth. They had entered their marriage as partners in ambition, united in purpose, but the birth of the twins tested their bond in ways they could never have imagined. Elizabeth, filled with love for her children but haunted by despair, could not hide her sorrow. Jonathan, proud and stubborn, tried to maintain a facade of control, but the helplessness gnawed at him. Nights were the hardest, when the house was quiet except for the small, irregular breaths of the twins. Elizabeth would lie awake, rocking them gently, tears staining her pillow, while Jonathan stared at the darkened ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar weight on his chest. The power he had sought seemed meaningless in the face of the vulnerability of life, and for the first time, he questioned the choices that had once seemed so certain. As the twins grew, their deformities became more pronounced. Limbs were twisted, movements awkward, and faces carried marks that no amount of care or attention could erase. Elizabeth and Jonathan did everything they could to provide comfort and stimulation. They sought help from distant doctors who traveled long hours to examine the children, offering treatments that were often harsh and ineffective, sometimes causing more pain than relief. Elizabeth read whatever medical texts she could find, desperate for answers, and Jonathan spent his wealth on specialists, hoping that science could undo what nature had delivered. Yet every attempt to improve the children's condition brought new challenges, deepening the emotional strain on the parents and on the household as a whole. The children, despite their physical challenges, developed their own personalities. They laughed when they could, cried when they were frustrated, and clung to their mother with an instinctive understanding that she was their protector in a world that seemed determined to reject them. Elizabeth's love was unwavering, but it was tinged with sorrow and fear. She often wondered what their lives would be like, how they would be perceived by the outside world, and whether the town would ever accept them. Jonathan, while less openly expressive, carried his own burden of guilt. He had sought power and prestige, yet he could not protect his children from suffering. The realization that ambition had blinded him to the true cost of his choices settled heavily on his shoulders, a weight that no wealth could lift. In the town, the whispers grew into hushed conversations among neighbors. Children were warned not to stare when passing the family's home, and strangers often avoided the winding road that led to the secluded house. The family became an object of fascination, horror, and cautionary tales, the subject of stories told around hearths during long winter nights. While some felt pity, others felt judgment, and a sense of isolation settled over Jonathan and Elizabeth. Even within their own home, fear of scandal kept them from showing the twins to anyone beyond the closest circle of servants and medical professionals. The twins were both a symbol of their ambition and a source of profound sorrow, a living testament, two choices that could not be undone. As the seasons passed, Elizabeth and Jonathan's relationship shifted. The shared tragedy that had once united them now tested their resilience and commitment. Moments of tenderness existed, but they were fragile, often overshadowed by tension and exhaustion. They argued over care, over treatment options, over what The world should know, and what must remain hidden. And yet, beneath the surface, there remained an unspoken understanding. The children were their responsibility, their legacy, and their bond. In private moments, Elizabeth would press the twins to her chest, whispering promises of love and protection, while Jonathan would sit quietly by, acknowledging the depth of what they had created and the price they had paid. Even in the face of hardship, the siblings were determined to persevere. They sought ways to protect the children, to provide some semblance of normalcy, and to shield them from the cruelty of gossip and judgment. But the world beyond the walls of their home was unforgiving, and the story of their family would continue to unfold with both heartbreak and a stark, undeniable humanity. Each day brought new struggles, new moments of hope, and new reminders of the consequences of choices made for ambition rather than love. And through it all, the children remained at the center of their lives, innocent yet burdened, loved yet marked by tragedy. A symbol of both the power and the peril that comes with defying the natural order. As the years passed, the house at the edge of the village became quieter, yet heavier with unspoken fears and silent sorrow. The twins, now old enough to understand more than their parents could comfortably admit, began to ask questions that no one had prepared them to answer. Elizabeth, ever protective, would gently redirect their curiosity, speaking in vague words about God's plan or the uniqueness of their existence. Jonathan, who had once approached life with calculated certainty, found himself fumbling for explanations, realizing that words and power could not shield them from the reality they faced. The deformities that marked the twins' bodies also set them apart from the other children in the town, and even the most tender words could not erase the cruel stares and whispered mockery that awaited them beyond the doors of their home. The townspeople, though initially hesitant, could not resist their natural curiosity and sense of judgment. Children dared one another to sneak near the property, glancing through windows to catch glimpses of the twins, while adults exchanged stories over fences and in marketplaces. Some spoke in hushed tones, imagining curses or divine punishment, while others were morbidly fascinated by the siblings' audacity to flout the natural order and yet survive. The family's reputation, once carefully cultivated, was now a fragile thread, fraying with each passing year. Invitations to church events and community gatherings ceased entirely. Acquaintances offered fleeting gestures of sympathy, but quickly withdrew, uncomfortable with the ongoing reminder of the consequences of ambition unchecked by morality within the walls of the home. The strain between Jonathan and Elizabeth deepened. Once partners in ambition, they now became partners in a daily struggle to maintain control over a life that seemed determined to unravel. Elizabeth spent hours tending to the twins' needs, often at the expense of her own health, while Jonathan, plagued by guilt and frustration, searched for remedies in old medical texts, correspondence with distant physicians, and even experimental treatments that promised hope but delivered little. The couple's love for one another, once intertwined with ambition, was now overshadowed by sorrow and fear. Their conversations became sharp with tension, punctuated by moments of tender concern. As they tried to reconcile the children's suffering with their own ambitions and desires, the twins, innocent and perceptive, became painfully aware of their differences. They experienced both love and isolation, joy and sorrow, often in the same breath. Elizabeth's whispered reassurances could not fully shield them from the knowledge that they were unlike anyone else, that their lives would always carry the weight of their parents' choices. Jonathan's attempts to empower them to provide resources, education, and understanding were limited by circumstance and by the harsh judgments of the outside world. Even within the sanctuary of their home, the twins were confronted daily by the limitations of their bodies and the expectations placed upon them. A constant reminder that life's blessings are never without burden. The broader society, meanwhile, began to intrude more forcefully. A distant relative, hearing of the family scandal and fearful that the union of siblings might taint the family name, arrived unannounced, demanding access to records, property, and even the children themselves. Legal authorities, informed by rumors and neighborly complaints, made inquiries into the legality of the marriage, threatening to expose the carefully guarded secrets of the household. Each confrontation left Jonathan and Elizabeth more anxious, more desperate to protect their children, yet increasingly aware that secrecy alone could not shield them forever. The twins, though young, sensed the tension, their quiet observations marked by a mix of fear and curiosity. They watched their parents with both awe and worry, aware that the fragile world they depended on could collapse at any moment. Elizabeth, exhausted by constant vigilance and grief, began to write down her thoughts in a series of journals, perhaps in the hope that posterity would understand her perspective. Her entries spoke of love for her children, frustration with her husbands, stubbornness, and a deep, abiding sorrow for the choices that had led them here. Jonathan, though less inclined to record his feelings, would sometimes sit for hours staring at the children as they slept, realizing with a painful clarity that ambition, no matter how skillfully pursued, could never guarantee happiness, health, or morality. The twins' deformities, once merely a source of fear, became a mirror reflecting the consequences of a path chosen without regard for the natural and moral order. A stark lesson for those who would come after them as the children grew older. The physical challenges they faced became more pronounced. Mobility was difficult. Simple tasks that other children took for granted became struggles filled with frustration and pain. Elizabeth and Jonathan adapted tirelessly, modifying furniture, employing assistants, and creating routines that allowed their children to experience some semblance of normal life. Yet, the outside world remained cruel and judgmental. Townspeople would sometimes leave notes, subtle warnings, or expressions of pity on the family's doorstep, each one a reminder that secrecy and isolation could only go so far. The twins' lives were bounded by love within the home, but the world beyond its walls offered little solace. Despite the hardship, moments of joy and resilience shone through. The twins laughed when they could, found delight in simple games, and formed a deep bond with each other that transcended their physical differences. Elizabeth marveled at their intelligence, their curiosity, their capacity for affection, while Jonathan took pride in their resilience, even as it reminded him of the costs of his ambition. These moments, fleeting as they were, provided both parents with glimpses of hope, fragile, yet undeniable proof that even in the face of tragedy, life could contain beauty, connection, and meaning. But the pressure continued to mount. Outside forces, internal guilt, and the relentless weight of consequence created an environment where fear, sorrow, and doubt intermingled with love and determination. The family existed in a delicate balance, one that could be disrupted at any moment by illness, scandal, or the inexorable passage of time. Each day required vigilance, patience, and endurance. As Elizabeth and Jonathan worked tirelessly to maintain a semblance of control over lives that had been forever altered by ambition, secrecy, and the immutable laws of nature. And through it all, the twins remained at the center of the story, a living testament to both the heights of human hope and the depths of human suffering, reminder that the choices we make, however carefully calculated, can ripple across generations, leaving consequences that no one can fully anticipate or undo. Time, relentless and impartial, continued its march, leaving scars that neither ambition nor wealth could erase. The twins grew, each day etching deeper into their lives the reality of their deformities and the isolation they brought. Their laughter, once a fragile spark of joy, became rarer, tempered by the constant awareness that the world beyond the walls of their home held nothing but judgment, whispers, and sometimes cruelty. Elizabeth and Jonathan devoted themselves entirely to their children, Yet the weight of guilt, sorrow, and exhaustion pressed heavier with each passing year. The home that had once hummed with secret plans and dreams of power now resonated with quiet sorrow, punctuated by the occasional shriek of frustration or the soft sighs of longing for a normal life that would never come. The outside world, in time, became increasingly insistent. Letters arrived from distant relatives, questioning the propriety of the siblings' union and demanding accountability. Townspeople, emboldened by curiosity or moral conviction, began to probe more openly, attempting to learn the truth of the household behind the shuttered windows. Doctors who had once offered hope now whispered cautions about the toll the children's conditions would take on both mind and body. Each intrusion, each inquiry, made it painfully clear to Jonathan and Elizabeth that they could never fully escape the consequences of their decisions. Their dream of consolidating power and wealth through an unnatural union had, over time, become an enduring nightmare. The twins, aware of the tension and secrecy surrounding them, struggled to find their place in a world that offered so little acceptance. They learned to navigate the home's strict routines, the careful attention of servants, and the watchful eyes of their parents. Small victories a step mastered, a laugh shared, a moment of playful curiosity became monumental triumphs against the relentless currents of their deformities and societal scorn. Yet, despite the love that surrounded them, the truth of their situation could not be entirely hidden. The children sensed the undercurrent of guilt and shame, and it shaped the very way they experienced the world. Their innocence, though powerful, was tempered by the awareness that their existence itself was viewed as an aberration by both society and, sometimes, even by those charged with their protection. Jonathan and Elizabeth, though unrelenting in their devotion, began to fracture under the weight of decades-long pressure. Arguments over care, treatment, and the future of their children became more frequent, though always beneath a surface of love that neither could entirely suppress. Elizabeth, whose health had been steadily declining under the strain of motherhood and care, spent long hours with her journal, recording memories, fears, and confessions she could never voice aloud. Jonathan, ever the pragmatist, attempted to shield the children from both physical hardship and societal judgment. But with each passing day, he confronted the harsh truth that control is an illusion, and that life, in its randomness and cruelty, often defies human will. By now, the twins had grown into adolescents, their deformities and isolation more pronounced than ever. Their education was conducted at home, with tutors brought in to shield them from ridicule. Yet, even here, the limitations imposed by their conditions were evident. While their minds were bright and curious, their bodies betrayed them at every turn. Physical play, so natural to other children, was a constant struggle, leaving them both frustrated and sorrowful. Elizabeth and Jonathan devoted themselves to their children's growth, often sacrificing their own health and well-being. Yet the awareness that their ambitions had created this unique suffering never left them. The weight of guilt was constant, pressing like a shadow that could not be shaken or ignored. Society, meanwhile, had long since formed its judgment. The family, once a symbol of potential power and ambition, had become a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. Visitors to the town, hearing the story from locals, often shook their heads in disbelief. Preachers used the tale as a moral warning during sermons, emphasizing the dangers of defying natural law and attempting to manipulate the course of life for personal gain. Even strangers who had never met the family seemed to know the story, repeating it with varying degrees of horror, fascination, and sympathy. The narrative of Jonathan and Elizabeth, once carefully guarded and secret, had now become a public lesson in ambition, secrecy, and the inescapable consequences of choices made without consideration of nature or morality. As the years advanced toward the inevitable, the twins' lives became increasingly confined to the home. Their experiences of the outside world limited and often mediated through the careful protection of their parents. Elizabeth's health deteriorated further, worn down by decades of caregiving and the emotional toll of sorrow, worry, and unspoken remorse. Jonathan, who had once pursued power with relentless ambition, now spent his days quietly observing his children, wrestling with the realization that wealth, strategy, and influence could not undo the suffering they endured. In their final years together, the family existed in a fragile balance of love, grief, and reflection, a household bound, not only by blood, but by the shared weight of choices and consequences that had begun generations before and would echo long after the legacy of Jonathan and Elizabeth. Their ambition and their tragic choices lived on not only in the physical form of their children, but in the memories and moral consciousness of the town. The twins, for all their suffering, became symbols of resilience, humanity, and the enduring power of parental devotion even in the face of immense adversity. Their lives, marked by both sorrow and profound moments of tenderness, reminded all who heard their story that ambition unchecked by morality carries a price no wealth or secrecy can erase. In the end, the story of the siblings who married for power and the twins they brought into a world unprepared to understand them was a testament to the profound complexity of human desire, love, and consequence. Ambition may drive men and women to extraordinary heights, but it can also blind them to the laws of nature, the limits of morality, and the fragility of life itself. The house at the edge of the village, once a place of whispered schemes and secret meetings, remained as a silent witness to the triumphs, sorrows, and irreversible consequences of choices made in pursuit of power. And long after the family itself had faded into history, the tale endured, a story of love and ambition, of innocence and suffering, and of the timeless lesson that some boundaries once crossed can never be undone.